Well, hello everyone, and welcome to a new episode of the Jazz Flashes podcast. My name is Anton Garcia-Fernandez, coming to you from Jackson in the state of Tennessee, here in the United States of America. And today we're going to be traveling across the ocean to the beautiful country of Denmark. And joining us in Copenhagen is Kjeld Frandsen, who's a journalist and music critic who was associated with the Copenhagen newspaper Berlingske Tidende in the years 1986 to 2021. Between 1970 and 1996, he was also employed at Danmarks Radio's Discotheque, the record library, and in the 1980s, he was associated with the music magazine M. He has contributed to a number of music books, encyclopedias, magazines, and journals, and he was also the editor of the 1987 edition of the Encyclopedia Politikens Jazz Lexicon. Also in the years of 1989 to 2001, he was chairman of JASA, the Danish Association of Jazz Media Workers. In the period between 2004 and 2006, he also presented a number of music-themed programs on Danmarks Radio, DR, the Danish state radio, just as he has been heard on Radio Jazz Copenhagen, which you can find at radiojazz.dk since 1998. He is an award-winning personality who received the Danish Jazz Media Award in 2008, and he is also, very importantly for the episode today, he is the co-author of the biography Svend Asmussen, 100 år med fuld musik. I hope I did not butcher the Danish language there. 100 years of full music from 2015, and he has also written the Copenhagen Jazz Festival's 40-year anniversary book back in 2018. And with Kjeld Frandsen, we're going to talk today about the great violinist from Denmark, Svend Asmussen. Kjeld, thank you so much for being here and welcome to the Jazz Flashes podcast.
Yes, thank you.
Well, one of the reasons why, I got in touch with you is this box set that I have in my hand of 5 CDs and 1 DVD called The Incomparable Fiddler, Svend Asmussen, 100 Years, because Svend Asmussen lived to be 100 years old and left a huge legacy of recordings and influences behind him. How were you acquainted or first acquainted with the music of Svend Asmussen?
I think I've heard Svend Asmussen's music since I was a kid, but I just found the jazz music later because he made a lot of popular things, reviews. He was well known for that, as an actor, as a comedian, and so on. But when I started listening to jazz when I was, I don't know, a teenager, I heard, of course, some records with Svend Asmussen and found out that he was great. And actually, I think maybe he disappeared from me for some time, but there was a Duke Ellington conference in Copenhagen in 1992, and suddenly he was alone on the stage playing Sophisticated Lady, and that was so incredible. And I found out how he's great. At the same time, he started his last band that lasted for 18 years, and the longest lasting band he had, a quartet, and made a great concerts and records and very great jazz music.
Now, Svend Asmussen is a big figure in Scandinavian jazz and European jazz and in jazz at large. And I'm wondering, what first attracted you to the music of Svend Asmussen? What was it about his music that you found so attractive and beautiful and memorable?
I think it's his virtuoso, and the way he improvises so melodic so easy, and it is swinging. It always swinging when he plays jazz.
Well, I was mentioning this box set that Storyville Records put out called Incomparable Fiddler because Kjeld Frandsen is the author of the liner notes, very informative and well-written liner notes in English for this box set that I truly would like to recommend to everybody out there. But besides that, besides these liner notes in English, he has written a book in Danish, which we mentioned before, 100 years of full music in 2015. How did that project come about? Why did you decide, and how did you decide to write a book about Svend Asmussen?
The idea of the book was a tribute because he was close to turning 100 years. And actually, it was his wife who had collected some letters and other things from his friends and people who had worked with through the years. And she couldn't write it herself, so he asked me if I was interested in, and together with my friend Frank, who's a music librarian, um, we started and found out should not be just a tribute; it should be a biography, basically good biography from the start, from his childhood and to his latest years. So that's what it became.
I suppose that while you were researching the book, you did have a chance to talk to Svend Asmussen himself
Yes, I
as you
had.
were
Yes, I
conducting
had.
the
Yes.
research for it. So, what memories do you have of him? What was he like as a person? What things did you discuss? Was there anything in particular that you remember from your uh, connection and from your conversations with him?
He could remember a lot of things, and he was a very friendly man, a little shy. Actually, the funny thing that he was a showman. In private, he was a little shy, and you never came really close. It was difficult to come really close to him, but he was very friendly, and we had good conversation, and he gave all these information that he wanted and could tell stories and anecdotes and so on. So he was a very kind, cultivated person. Yes, he was.
And I suppose
But
that
he was known as a strong band leader. It was very hard to work with because he was a perfectionist. So the musicians he played with, they had a very hard job to follow his ideas.
I suppose at that time he was in his 90s or so when you were talking to him.
Yeah.
How much did he remember? With what exactitude did he remember some of the things that he lived through in his life when you talked to him?
I think he remembered most of it. Had a very fine memory, so could tell anything from his career in the 20s and the 30s and so on.
Well, he definitely had an amazing career, and that's something that I would definitely like to cover in our conversation today. He was born in Copenhagen, and I would like to talk a little bit about his childhood. Is this a person who always knew he was going to be a musician? How did he get into music, and how did he get into jazz?
Yeah, I don't think it was an idea to be a musician because there were no tradition in his family for being musicians. His father was a very businessman. It was a very rich family. They were from Germany. His parents, and when he was 7 years old, he started playing a violin because in these family, it was often that people played. So he started playing the violin and had classical training, but never a conservatory. And then he discovered jazz when he was around 14 years, 13, 14 years, and began to buy records. Very few records at that time was available, but got some of them, and he was especially interested in Joe Venuti, the American violinist Joe Venuti, the best violinist at that time. So he was inspired by him, and his first band was some copying Joe Venuti's quartet.
Well, Joe Venuti was highly influential, especially when he was recording with guitarist Eddie Lang, and
Sure.
in those early years of the late 1920s and early 30s recordings, before Lang himself passed away. Um, what other musicians did he look up to? Were there any Danish musicians or any European musicians that influenced him, or was it mostly an American?
There was another violinist, Elidonde, that he heard and was very inspired by until he found out that Elidonde has copied most of his things from Joe Venuti. So he started to listen to the real deal, Joe Venuti. And actually, Joe Venuti played in Copenhagen in 1934. And actually, Svend Asmussen made a review of the concert in a magazine, so he could have been a jazz critic as well. It's very well done. Svend Asmussen was really talented in many, many ways. He could draw, he could make sculptures, and he had ambitions to be artist, a sculpturist, and went to the academy, but it never happened because the music was important. He also started studying to be a dentist and studying for a couple of years, but he gave up because the music was more and more music. And he made his own band in the middle of the 30s.
Was his decision to become an artist, a musician, supported by his family, or were they not happy about this?
I don't think the family was so happy about him being a musician. There was no tradition in that family, so they thought he should be a dentist. But so he was the only one in the family who actually became a musician. But they had to accept it because actually he was very big, famous in Denmark. He made his first record in his own name in 1935 when he was 19 years old.
In 1935, so it didn't take very long after that Joe Venuti concert in Denmark for him to actually get into the recording studio. It's interesting because in the 1920s and the 1930s, the violin was an important instrument in jazz. There was, of course, Venuti, Stuff Smith, and other violinists like Eddie South, for example. But Venuti seems to have been really a big influence on most of the European musicians that took up the violin around that time. How would you describe Svend Asmussen's violin style, and in what way was it different from, say, Joe Venuti's?
I think it's a little lighter. It's flowing. What's the word? And very swinging, elegant, very elegant, and swinging.
Now, you mentioned before we began talking, we've been talking for this past week, off and on, that Sven Asmussen is not really just a jazz or swing violinist, but he is viewed more as an all-around entertainer. What do you mean by that? In what ways was he more than a jazz violinist?
In his first band, it was playing for dance, what bands do at that time, playing for dancing. And then he found out if he could make some funny introductions, people would laugh. And uh, then he liked to make people laugh. He liked to entertain people. And in 1937, he was in Sweden. We could sail to Sweden because Jimmy Lunsford's band played in Sweden. And Jimmy Lunsford, he had a lot of the gags and this orchestra. They sang. Some of the musicians made the vocal trios and so on. And he liked this that something happened apart from playing the music, and it should be entertainment.
Besides the jazz and the swing element, do you see any other elements that kind of coalesced, came together to build his or create his style? For example, was there any popular music of Denmark, any traditional music of Denmark or Scandinavia in general that had any sort of influence in his style and the stuff that he recorded?
I think he listened to a lot of music, but his recording was very much the American songbook. So, but he was very interesting in any kind of music, also classical music and pop music. Yes.
Now, during World War II, Svend Asmussen spent some difficult times outside of Denmark. And I suppose this is something that you talk about at length in your book in Danish, which unfortunately I haven't had a chance to read, but you do mention in the liner notes to this box set, 100 Years of Svend Asmussen, the Incomparable Fiddler, that Svend Asmussen spent some time in a Nazi concentration camp during the years of World War II. Could you talk a little bit about that? How did that happen and why?
Yes, it wasn't exactly a concentration camp. It was a prison in Berlin. But in August 1943, the Danish government and the Danish people said no more collaboration with the German that had occupied Denmark. So, as a sort of a revenge from the Germans, they arrested more 400 of people, many people that were famous just and Svend Asmussen was arrested and went to a Danish jail first, and then he was brought to Berlin, where he was in a cell for a month and terrible conditions. But luckily he was released and went back to Copenhagen, and everybody was happy. But it was very hard for him, of course. He had it was a terrible thing. So that
It seems clear, why he was arrested, but I wonder if there's any information about why or how he was released.
Yeah, I think there was a German in Denmark who had some influence in the occupation, and he was actually an anti-Nazis, and he helped actually some things to be released, and it's a little difficult story what really happened, but actually he was released and came home, and there was a concert when he came home, and people were very happy and praised him very much.
And what he did was he continued his musical career when he got back to Denmark.
Yeah, at that time he was very involved in entertainment, in reviews, and actually in the spring of 1943 he has disbanded. He has stopped with his band to be an entertainer and to be an actor. And mostly he worked with the guitarist Ulrik Neumann, and Ulrik Neumann's sister Gerda Neumann was a singer, and they had a very popular trio together. So that was he wanted, to be an actor and be an entertainer. So he was very much an entertainer, but he never left jazz. So he went back to jazz, and in the middle of the 40s, he made a group again that played very fine jazz, but also still popular things, and loved to entertain. There should always be something funny in what he did. And he was extremely popular in Sweden. Maybe he was more popular in Sweden than in Denmark, but so we had a very big audience in Sweden. They made some reviews for some months in Denmark, and then the whole review continued in Stockholm, and they played a couple of months after. So he was working all the time. Actually, it was never home.
I was not aware that Svend Asmussen had been an actor besides being a musician. I know him in his facet as a violinist. Did he? You mentioned that he made some movies. When he made some movies, did he made movies? Did he make movies as an actor, or did he mostly play himself as a musician?
He made movies as an actor, and but very often with included songs or violin playing or anything. He was apart from playing the violin, he could play a lot of other instruments. He was what you call a multi-instrumentalist. He could play guitar, bass, drums, anything but horns. He played and wipes. Many of his early recordings, you can hear a wipe, wipes, and that's Sven was playing the wipes too. He changed from violin to wipes. Also piano on something else.
We're talking about Svend Asmussen, the Danish violinist, with Kjeld Frandsen today on the Jazz Flashes podcast. And I'm looking at the first CD of this 5 CD plus 1 DVD box set called The Incomparable Fiddler. And it features recordings from 1937 to 1944, and that's the early years of Asmussen's career. And there are two questions that come to mind. The first of them is, how popular was jazz in Scandinavia in the 1930s and 1940s? Because it seems to have been a very popular style, kind of like the pop music of the day, a little bit like it was here in the United States.
Yes, it was really popular, and because it was also dance music, so they played at the dance halls, and it was rather popular, especially for young people. So, and during the occupation, German occupation, it became very, very popular because it was a kind of protest music against the Germans and the Nazis.
Looking at the repertoire here, I see lots of songs that would become standards. Cherokee, Exactly Like You, On the Sunny Side of the Street, That's My Weakness Now, Three Little Words by Ruby and Kalmar. But there's also at least one tune that was written by Svend himself, Han är vänt på mig.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering how important was Svend Asmussen as a composer?
Yeah, he was rather active and rather popular, yes. And when we talk about these records and that period, it's very, he started to make the vocal harmonies with his musicians. And these musicians, they weren't singers, but he told them to sing. He told them to sing, you sing this voice, you sing this voice. And then they could make these very special harmonies. And he worked very, very hard with it. And he worked until it was complete. There's no, well, it's good enough. No, it could take hours, days, weeks to get a number complete. But that's how he worked.
I suppose his presence on the radio in Denmark in those days must have been pretty prominent, right?
Yeah, sure.
Now, if we move into the 1950s, and we see on CD2 that there are quite a few recordings that he made in the city of Hamburg in Germany. In what ways did his music change in the 1950s? Because from a dance band, now we move onto what is known as the Svend Asmussen Quintet. So, of course, this is the time also when he recorded one of the songs that is usually associated with him, Rhythm is Our Business, by Sami Khan and Saul Chaplin. How did his music change in the 1950s?
I think it changed a little more. Still dance music, but also entertainment music, and he toured a lot in Europe at that time, Germany, Italy, played all over the European, and he was very. He could talk any language. He could introduce and making jokes in German, in French, in English, in Italian. And in the Scandinavian country, Scandinavian languages too. So he loved to entertain people, but it was all still a good bit of jazz. He loved to play jazz, but he knew that an ordinary audience, very few actually loved jazz. So he tried to put a little jazz in everyone all the time.
Well, the music world was changing, of course, in the 1950s with the arrival of rock and roll, and then
sure.
the beat music from England with the Beatles in the 60s. So I suppose that must have been quite a challenge for a jazz musician at that time. But the quality of his recordings was consistently high. One listens to this 5 CD box set, and it's just amazing the amount of great recordings that are contained in here. And this is just a part of the legacy of the great Svend Asmussen. I think we should talk about Svend Asmussen as an international star. Because you mentioned that he toured Europe and that he spoke several languages and he was quite popular in other parts of the world. What about his relationship with the United States? Did he travel much in the United States? Did he play much or record much over here?
Actually, he had a dream of being breaking through in the United States. He actually had dreamed to come to the United States and work very much, but it didn't happen very much. he was there in a couple of times, and he met Ben Goodman. He played with Ben Goodman and other American musicians. But it wasn't until the late 1959 when he, together with guitarist Ulrik Neumann and the Swedish singer Alice Babs, made the trio Swedanes. And Swedanes became extremely popular also in the United States. And they toured and they recorded in the United States and played on the yes, the club in Hollywood and other places, and the great TV shows, and that was a great success. And he loved to be in the United States, and but he had tried to come to the United States before, but it was difficult. He had a family; his musicians had families, so it was a little difficult to come to the United States. But he had friends in the United States and other musicians, and he was well known. So actually, I think he wanted to be even better than he was. If he came to the United States, he could have a new challenge to be even better than he was. That was he, yes.
I think it's very interesting when I think about the jazz that was produced in Scandinavia, from the 1930s all the way until the present day. One thing that has always struck me is the fact that there were so many American musicians that were touring in Scandinavia, and so many, there were several of them actually who stayed there, who settled in Scandinavia because they were more appreciated and treated better in many ways than here
Yeah.
in the United States. Uh, could you tell us a little bit about that? Why was it that so many American musicians stopped off in Copenhagen and in Stockholm and in different places like that, where there were, of course, jazz festivals, but also venues for them to play, and people appreciated their music?
Yes, I think they appreciated their music, and they the Europeans had the respect for the musicians, and a lot of jazz musicians in the United States have really difficult problems with the audience,
Yeah, I think
places, with
some of them even stayed there. I'm thinking of Ben Webster, for example, who
yeah,
you
Ben
know is
Webster went to Copenhagen and lived there until he died, and he's buried in Copenhagen. And Extra Gordon lived here for 14 years, and we have also Kenny Boo and Ed and Thad Jones is also buried here in Denmark. So they felt good, and the Danish people and Danish audience were open to the music, and maybe yeah.
well, throughout his career, Svend Asmussen seems to have collaborated with a lot of great jazz musicians. One of them, for example, is Duke Ellington. But here we have on CD3 we can hear him with Stéphane Grappelli from France,
Yeah,
the great fiddler, violinist from France and the Hot Club de France, with Django Reinhardt. Of course, Reinhardt is not playing on these recordings because they're actually from 1965, 64. But then also, he made recordings with Stuff Smith. What are some of your favorite collaborations that Svend Asmussen recorded over the years? Because to me, hearing him in the company of other great musicians only makes his music even better.
yeah. That's actually he had met Stéphane Grappelli and Django Reinhardt in Paris in 1939, and played with them. So they were friends. In the meantime, Django died in 1953, I think, but he had still the connection with the Catholic. So they met from time to time and played. And that's true. It was good for Svend Asmussen to have this challenge because he hated actually routines, and he was very curious about something happening, and it was good for him to play with Capelli and Stab Smith. He loved the Stab Smith. After Joe Benucci, he found Stab Smith in the 30s, and he was very, very fond of Stab Smith. And Stab Smith came to Copenhagen and lived in Denmark for his last years, and he's still buried in Denmark. So Stab Smith was one of the Americans who found a new home in Denmark too.
And Stab Smith also is a very bluesy fiddler. So he is one of those violinists that, or jazz musicians that marry the swing side of his music and the blues side of his music. I wonder how much of an influence that was on Svend Asmussen.
I think it was a very strong influence because Stab Smith had this hard swinging, really hard swinging, and that was Sven was very fond of it, and he thought, I can't do that, but I'll try to. So Svend Asmussen often very underrated himself. He thought that everyone was better than him, and well, he was okay. He was a man who played the violin, but that's what that. That's not actually. Yes, it was. The funny things about it that he's so underrated in front of other people, and compared to especially when he talked about classical violinists, they were the real ones, Menuhin and Isaac Stern. So they were real violinists. He was just a man with a violin.
I actually wanted to ask you something related to that. How important do you think classical music was for Svend Asmussen? Because we know that he comes from this swing background, but I wonder if you can hear any sort of classical music influence on his style of playing at all.
Yes, he was influenced by and he loved the classical music. And the funny thing is that in the 70s, he made a trio with two Swedes, a clarinetist, Buddy Bigman, and a piano player, even Reinliden. And they had the trio, and they played baroque music in a swinging way. And they toured. They played a lot of church concerts. They toured in China, and they also played in Carnegie Hall in New York. So it was a very popular trio, and they played Bach and Vivaldi and Mozart in a swinging way. So he loved that music very much, and he could do it.
So some of his earlier recordings feature the musician Ulrich Neumann, and you mentioned Ulrich Neumann before.
Yeah.
And of course, I am aware of Ulrich Neumann through the recordings that he made with Svend Asmussen. Could you tell us a little bit about Ulrich Neumann? It's a musician that seems to be important in the career and in the development of Svend Asmussen as a musician and also as a performer and an entertainer. But he's a musician that I'm sure the general public at large doesn't know that much about, and I'm sure you talk about him in your book. So I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about him.
Yes, Svend Asmussen met him already when they were very, very young, and Ulrich Neumann is on his first record, Tiger from 1935, and they kept that relationship and friendship and played so much together. Ulrik Neumann was a fabulous guitar player. The funny thing is that he couldn't improvise, but so he learned all the things they played, but he was really, and they made shows that, when they played together, very serious, but also very funny things. Funny things, and when they were in the United States, in California in 1960, the Swedes, they had the opportunity to come to one of our studio to play a Stu record. I can show you. They made this record.
Yeah, the album is Danish Imports.
Danish Imports, a dual record, and it's fantastic. I don't know if you know it, but it's a very dual work. And actually, Svend Asmussen got a letter from the composer Håkon Carmichael, who got that record and wrote to him, "It's the best record I ever heard." and it's really a great chamber jazz album. Yeah.
Yes, I do have a copy of that record, Danish Imports, and I must say that it's one of my favorite records of Svend Asmussen's, for sure. He has made a lot of wonderful records, but that one in particular, there's something to it. There's a spontaneity to it that must have come from all the years that they worked and recorded together. It's just a great record. In fact, in my opinion, that is possibly a good gateway to his music. If one can find that record, it's a good record to listen to as the entrance into the music of Svend Asmussen. Now, I'm wondering, Kjeld, Svend Asmussen passed away a few years ago, and he passed away when he was close to being 101 years old, just a few days short of his 101st birthday. And I'm wondering, all these years later, not after his death necessarily, but after his heyday as a musician and his heyday of popularity, how much and in what ways is Svend Asmussen remembered in Denmark and also in Scandinavia at large?
He's remembered as both as an entertainer and a great jazz musician. Maybe mostly as a jazz musician, because the last quartet that he had for 18 years, and maybe his best, they made a lot of concerts and what was really jazz. And he had a stroke in 2010 and was paralyzed, and but had physical training, so he came back and could walk and actually play violin in private at home, but he wouldn't play in public because he was a perfectionist, so he wouldn't play. But I talked to him a couple of months before he died, and actually he played with his wife sometimes, but it doesn't sound good. But then his wife in the background called, "Yes, it sounds good, and it still swings."
well, once you have it, you never lose it, right? That's what is usually what you usually say about musicians of the quality and stature of Svend Asmussen. I'm wondering, Kjeld, if somebody is out there listening to us and he or she has never heard the music of Svend Asmussen, of course, this box set here, The Incomparable Fiddler, Svend Asmussen, 100 Years, that came out in 2016 on Storyville Records. Storyville Records, a great label out of Scandinavia that really puts out some great box sets and fine recordings of great quality by uh, fine musicians in the history of jazz. Some of them Scandinavian and some of them American and from all over the world, really. This is a good place to get to know the music of Svend Asmussen's for sure, of Svend Asmussen for sure, because not only do you get five CDs worth of music, but also one DVD that you can actually play and see Svend Asmussen, and the DVD was recorded live at the Montmartre Jazzhus in Copenhagen in 1986, and that includes Kenny Drew on piano, Niels Henning Ørsted Pedersen on bass, and Ed Thigpen on drums. So that's quite the lineup right there. Um,
Yeah.
but besides this box set, which, as I say, is the perfect entry into his music, what would you say are his best records, or the ones that you like the most, or the ones that you would recommend the most to anybody out there who may want to get into the music of Svend Asmussen?
Well, I think some of the last one with the quartet are very good. And he made his last CD he made in Florida, because he lived in the winter time in Florida the last 10 years of his life. And yes, there's a lot of records. Funny thing about, we talked about rock and roll music and electric music. He had a son, Klaus, that was a rock and roll musician and played guitars. And they, when he, and they had a music room in the basement in the villa where Sven lived. And one night, Klaus came home and he thought, "What's that sound?" It was something straight. And then it was when Sven has gone down to the basement and plugged his violin to Klaus' equipment and used the wow pedals. And suddenly he was very interested in playing electric music. And then he actually had a career in the late 60s and start of the 70s, where he played a lot of electric music with wow pedals and rock and roll.
Well, that's interesting. That's something I
Yeah,
obviously had no idea about, and I don't think I've ever heard any of those records.
yeah. He made a record with the drummer Ed Thigpen. They made a record together with jazz music.
A little bit in the style of Jean-Luc Ponty, or
Yeah,
somebody along those
yeah,
lines.
yeah.
Hmm. So what
There's also a record called Violet Summit from Basel in Switzerland, and where they played with Jean-Luc Ponty and Stuff Smith and Bradley.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you, which one of those summits, when he appears with some other violin or jazz greats, which one of those do you think are the most recommendable, or the ones that you listen to the most, or the ones that you like the most?
Well, it's difficult. It's a little difficult. Actually, I liked very much his records from the late 30s and start of the 1940s with his as a quintet with very fine musicians, pianist Kjeld Frandsen and others. They were so elegant, swinging, and the vocal combinations.
Yeah,
Also,
there's a certain elegance and a certain lightness to his style, as you were mentioning before, and I think you can see that from the very beginning of his career. Those early records from the 30s and 40s are very much of their time, but very they do stand the test of time for the quality of the musicianship, and also the great repertoire that they're working with right there. They're very engaging records in so many ways. I do agree with you that in order to get to know the music of Svend Asmussen, we must start in the 30s and 40s and then move into the 50s, 60s,
Yeah,
and so on. Because, you know, his recording career lasted
yeah.
for more than
There's
half a
also,
century.
I don't know if you can see it, this one.
That's says embraceable.
Embraceable, yeah. He played it in France with French musicians in the 80s and forgot all about it. And then they found the tapes a few years before he died. And he was so exciting about when he listened to it. It was the best thing because he was very self-critic. He didn't like these recordings. But this one, it was his own favorite because he was just went to Paris, met these musicians, and they played all night, and he was so inspired, and so it's a very interesting record.
So, Kjeld, as a final question to wind down our conversation today, which I'm really enjoying here on the Jazz Flashes podcast, and I'd like to thank you for your time and your knowledge and your willingness to sit down with us today and talk about Svend Asmussen. Um, if if there's somebody out there that does not know the music of Svend Asmussen, why should they listen to the music of Svend Asmussen? What will they get when they listen to Sven's style for the first time? Why is it a good idea to play his music, to get to know his story, and to get to listen to the music that he made all those years ago?
Well, it's because if you talk about the most important jazz violinist ever, you can mention four or five, and one of them is Svend Asmussen, and he has this swinging, light, very virtuoso style, and but also because he was what you call he could anything. He was a multi-talented. He could write. Could sing. He also was very interested in multi-tracking, where he played all the instruments self and so on. But if you ask me why should I listen to Svend Asmussen, that's why you're going to have great experience with jazz, to listen to a musician who really could play like nobody else, and you'll be surprised every time you listen to him.
And I think I've told you before, Cal, that you know, it's interesting to listen to Svend Asmussen play with other violinists because you can very easily recognize who is playing at each
Yeah,
point. You know, if it's playing with Grappelli, you know when Grappelli is soloing, and you know when Asmussen is soloing. Same thing with Stuff Smith. So it's the same instrument, it's the same style of music, but their approach is slightly and subtly and very interestingly different. So you know, that's one of the reasons why I love his music so much is the subtlety and the elegance and just the way that you know how much he puts into the songs that he plays and how different he makes them, and you know his improvisation, his talent for improvisation is also uh, extremely interesting, I think.
yeah, yeah.
This is the Jazz Flashes podcast, and as we're winding down the conversation with Kjeld Frandsen, who has written the liner notes for this box set, The Incomparable Fiddler, Svend Asmussen, 100 Years, but also a biography that he has co authored in Danish back in 2015, which I assume is the most complete biography on Svend Asmussen to date. If I ever get a chance to read it, I'll let you know what I think. But if you listen to Svend Asmussen and you like his music and you speak or read Danish, that's the book to look for. 100 Years of Full Music from 2015, written by our guest today, Kjeld Frandsen, who also writes the liner notes in English of this box set, The Incomparable Fiddler, Svend Asmussen, on Storyville Records, which I think is a great introduction to the music of this great violinist from Denmark by the name of Svend Asmussen. Kjeld, it really has been a pleasure to chat with you this morning on the Jazz Flashes podcast. This morning for me, but this afternoon for you in Copenhagen. Thank you very much. Tak, and please come back to see us anytime you want.
Yes, it has been a pleasure for me too, very much. Very much.
This has been a new episode of the Jazz Flashes podcast. My name is Anton Garcia-Fernandez, and we've recorded a conversation today with Kjeld Frandsen, who joined us from the beautiful city of Copenhagen in Denmark, to talk about Svend Asmussen, the great fiddler, the great violinist, jazz, swing violinist from Denmark. If you have any comments, anything you'd like to let us know, just leave your comment underneath the video. And most of all, what I need to say on parting is listen to the music of Svend Asmussen. That's the best thing that you can do, and we hope that our conversation today has led you closer to the figure of Svend Asmussen and has whetted your appetite for listening to his music. That's what we hope here on the Jazz Flashes podcast. Thank you, Kjeld, and thanks anyone out there listening to us. And remember, keep listening to good jazz music, because as old Billy Strayhorn and Duke Ellington said, well, it don't mean a thing if it ain't got that swing. Thank you, and so long, everybody.